Hey, stop the music. No, the red. Just push the red button. There you go. Yeah, that one. Okay. Hey, yeah, I know. I need to do this announcement on the wittiest 5-star review. No, they can't hear you. No. Okay. Hey, everybody. Before we start the show, the interview with Frank Smethurst, I got to get back with everybody on the wittiest 5-star review. So we had this contest that went on, I guess it started in July, and went all the way through Christmas Day. So now it is December 30th, 2020. We sent the reviews off to our panel of judges. They came back and told us N. Van Rees won wittiest 5-star review, and it's out there on Apple Podcast. So if you want to take a look at it, you can go to Southeastern Fly on Apple Podcast. It's under highly recommended, and he sent it in on September 30th of 2020. He says, don't even live in the Southeast, but he still listens to Southeastern Fly, which is really cool. He likes the way you learn about the background, and after every episode, I want to jump in the car and head for the Caney Fork or the Smoky Mountains or the Forgotten Coast. So he has listened to several of these, or she. And if that's not enough, so this is where it gets into the witty part. And if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, and you've heard People of the River, this is where N. Van Rees, he moves into more, or she moves into more the witty part of the review. If that wasn't enough, it's worth the price of admission, which is free. It's worth the price of admission just for Dan Charlie's Whiskey River story. Classic. 5 stars. Highly recommended. And don't forget to mend. So you can tell that N. Van Rees has listened to quite a few podcasts, as they say, too many. But what else are you going to do whenever you're mowing the yard, traveling on an airplane, riding in the car to the river, which I hope everybody's doing right now. But so that's it. We've got the box of swag. It's now come into a box of swag, and I'm looking in. It's got hats and sunglass holders and some T-shirt or two. There's quite a few things in there that'll make N. Van Rees' life just a little bit better, hopefully. But anyway, for all the folks that have given us the 5-star reviews, we really appreciate the reviews and you taking time out and do that. And if you want to write a review, that's even better. We appreciate that. The contest is pretty much over. Thank you so much for listening, and turn it back over to our interview with Frank Smethurst. 3, 2.
You know, David, I started fishing with a cane pole in Georgia. I remember big missions up to Lake Lanier. I remember big missions down to the Okefenokee. I remember big missions down on the east beach of St. Simons. I remember catching fish and a lot of pinfish and little fish off the beaches of northeastern Florida. My family and I were down in that 30A area when there literally was nothing there. We were a really big outdoor family. We went around the South collecting plants. My mom was a botanist. We traveled around in this big blue Dodge van, the Smethurst, just driving around everywhere in the South from Atlanta. I started fishing because we were always in some sort of interesting place to fish.
And was it cane pole and worm, cane pole and crickets, that sort of thing?
Cane pole and all sorts of things. There was nothing, and really quickly I became really interested in, rods and reels. And at a really young age, I had Sears and Roebuck rods and reels. And then pretty quickly I started fishing with Shakespeare and Fenwick rods and Fluger, and then ultimately Penn spinning reels. Yeah, so, I started fly fishing when I was about 7 or 8. But I had already been fishing really seriously, and I started with even, when I was a toddler with a hand line. That was more in the ocean up in Maine. My family is part from the north and part from the south. That's why sometimes you're going to hear some accent out of me, and sometimes you're not. If we were doing this a little bit later in the evening and I was drinking a couple beers while we were podcasting, you would hear a little bit more twang, southerner-wise, out of me. It's just been confusing all these years. I'm a Yankee in the South, and when I go, up to see my family in the North, I'm a redneck up there. So, not sure where I belong.
I totally get that because we lived in the north whenever I was a kid. Born in Memphis, moved to Michigan, then moved
Oh,
to Chattanooga. So I
yeah.
totally get that. And I've probably got enough twang for both of us, so I think
I
we'll
was
get
about
through
to
this
say
thing pretty good.
that's an interesting blend, that Michigan Tennessee one.
Whew,
Pretty,
yeah.
pretty exotic. Pretty
Yes, it's
exotic.
kind of outcast in a way, but anyway. And as far as the Penns and the Shakespeares and the Flugers and all that, my grandfather had all of those reels and
Yep.
all of those rods, and my dad had the Daiwas
Hmm.
and the Penns and all that too. So I think our paths probably kind of started similar, but 30A has grown into a metropolis now. I don't know if you've been down there recently, but it's all big houses
Yeah.
and expensive stuff that I probably try to get away from more than get towards. So
Yeah, I fished down out of watercolor and went to a film festival down there a few years ago. And though it's grown, there's still some gorgeous places, right out the back
yes,
door.
absolutely. Well, welcome into Southeastern Fly. This is David Perry. I'm your host today. Thanks for stopping by and giving us a listen. Feel free to share this podcast with your friends and your fishing partners and hit that subscribe button. That helps us out as well. Let's get rolling now. So let's talk about my guest here. First came across this guy when I was meeting with a group of friends. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that I'm part of a group for over 15 years, and we call ourselves the Liars and Tires. We're a loose-knit group, but we travel together. We meet together. We eat together. We tie flies together. We tell lies together. We do a lot of things together. And we meet at each other's house about once a month or so. And during that meeting, somebody will cook, somebody will tie, and eventually we'll start watching TV. Since it's a fishing meeting, we generally go to fishing shows as our backstop, and we got to the point where the host would record shows, and we came across this show one time called Trout Unlimited. Now, if you've been around as long as I have, there's been a couple of different Trout Unlimiteds, but we recorded that, and we sat down one night with all of us had a nice adult beverage, and we started watching what was called Trout Unlimited, and we saw this guy wheel out of a complex, I guess I should say, in a truck, and he was towing an Airstream behind him. And the first shot that I remember, may not have been the first shot, but the first shot that I remember was him talking on the phone saying, "Wow, I can't really believe that I'm doing this, but this is really cool, and I'm headed across the United States." He traveled across the country, and I'm assuming he traveled probably with a cameraman or had somebody pull up, but he was pulling that Airstream, and it was decaled up, if I remember correctly, as a trout, and maybe it was a rainbow trout. I can't. Now we're trying to get back in my vault here, and that's going to be kind of hard to do. But he was pulling this Airstream camper, and he towed it basically across the United States. He went all the way from, I believe, Colorado, that area, out through Missouri, up into, ironically enough, Michigan, where if you've listened to the podcast, you know that I've got some ties to Michigan, and then down through Nashville. He basically came within about 5 miles of my house whenever he passed through Murfreesboro, and he's headed down to Atlanta, which is where he grew up. Growing up in Atlanta is what makes him a Southern boy, and therefore he qualifies to be a guest on Southeastern Fly. He's a guide. He's a former sales rep. He ties flies. He hosts trips. He's fresh off a season guiding in Alaska. Please welcome to the podcast, Frank Smethurst. Frank, thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you, David. I'm really glad to be here.
I've got some questions written out. We talked earlier on the phone to get this thing arranged, and boom, a couple hours later, here we are recording. You sitting I assume that's your house that you're sitting in. Is that right?
Yeah, yep. This is my house, and I put the house plants in such a way so that it looks like I'm speaking to you from between two ferns.
And I've got my autographed poster of Joan Wolfe behind me, as well as a wooden drift boat placard that a friend of mine made. Yeah, Kevin did a really nice job on that, and you can't really see it, but there's a older reel sitting right there beside it. Oh, cool. So we're gussied up here. We're ready to talk some fishing.
Let's do it.
So let's get started. You started fishing, and you talked about going down into Florida, and your mother was a botanist.
Yeah.
So you started around the Atlanta area, I guess. Does that sound right?
As I may have mentioned before, I'm from a dual family. One was north and one was south. My father was from Raleigh, North Carolina, and my mother was from Boston, Massachusetts. And when we would go up and visit my mom's family in the north, I would fish for bass and particularly mackerel and bluefish and stripers in the ocean, flounder.
Mm.
When I was a tiny little kid with a hand line, and then when I'd come home from that, I started to really get after the fish in Georgia. So it was so enveloping for me, starting when I was about 4 years old, to go to the water and try and catch something nonstop. That I really there was no place that I didn't at least try to fish a little. And sooner or later, growing up in Georgia, I was really lucky. There's so many amazing places to fish around Georgia and the American Southeast.
When you're that age, you find those little spots, like the little pond in front of the bank, the little pond that you had to climb the fence to at the golf course, the river
Yep.
that your parents drop you off at while they go to work or go shopping or whatever. And I don't think I haven't really grown out of that like some folks do. And it sounds like you probably really haven't gotten past that either.
No. I mean, some of the greatest fishing I've ever had, and this is ongoing, is sometimes way closer to home and less of a project than some of the more elaborate fishing, which, I do some of that too. Sooner or later, really digging into and becoming extremely familiar with, your backyard or your close to home spots. Sometimes that is the best way to really become a better fisherman and, catch some really remarkably exotic fish. Yeah, I live in Colorado now. So I got to tell you, one of the things that I miss the most in this trout culture of the American West is fishing for bass and fishing for stripers and being able to catch brim and crappie. Although you're in the crappie zone, you call them crappie, right?
Yep, we're in the crappie zone.
I'm going to represent for Atlanta then, because we call them crappie.
Yep.
I don't know what the difference could be between Murfreesboro and Atlanta, but it's not Mason-Dixon. It's crappie. It's the crappie line.
Yeah. And that part of that may pull over from my Memphis days. I was born in Memphis, and maybe that's where it starts.
Yeah,
but
it's a little bit more west.
Yeah, and I don't care what you call them; they taste good.
They do.
Call them what you want.
Yeah. They're if you call them crappie, know that they're never crappie.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Love that.
Oh, so how'd you really get your start in fly fishing?
I got my start in fly fishing from when I was about 6 or 7. I found a book at the school that I went to in Atlanta about fly fishing. And I was so excited to find any book about any kind of fishing in the school library. And that I was suddenly, the teachers actually approved of me diving into this book and reading it. It was just, it was like suddenly school got more interesting and my fishing was enabled. Before you knew it, I was reading about how to throw the fly, throwing a popping bug into a pond and catch fish with a fly, and how to cast. And it was a revelation. So really, I'd been fishing so much, but I read about fly fishing, and then I began to dabble with it through friends of my parents. And then, honestly, David, my grandfather, who died before I was born, was a tremendous fly fisherman. And I literally think that I was it skipped a generation, and I was genetically predisposed to fishing just because he was all about it.
You're not the first one I've heard say that. Actually, a couple of episodes ago, Seth, he owns a fly shop down in Chattanooga. Seth said this very same thing, that his grandfather was a big time fly fisherman, and he got a couple little items, like a book and maybe some flies, and he treasures that. I mean, just like I treasure my grandfather's fly rod that I had refurbished. Same thing, you kind of grab hold of. It may not be a thing. It may be a story. It may be. It could be anything, but you grab hold of that, and I think that sort of stuff helps to shape you. It may not be ultimately the driving force, but it certainly does shape you, for sure.
It did for me.
How do you go from that kid that's reading books about popping bugs and fishing some? What's that look like as you start moving forward? Where do you go next?
Well, I was such a focused kid. There was no, hey, here's where Frank the Kid stops, and here's where Frank's hobbies start. There was no line. I was all in. I was all about birds, animals, and catching fish, and for a long time, reptiles and amphibians as well. There was nothing that was safe. I carried the rod, but man, if a snake slithered by, I was going to grab it. And if I could catch a lizard or a salamander or a crawdad along the way, I would. But, it was, just keeping my eyes peeled between casts, looking for fish.
Fly rod takes you different places, doesn't it?
Oh, it took me everywhere.
Yeah.
It took me everywhere. And, and at that time, I was fishing all different methodologies. Right around the time when I was sort of a middle teenager, I got my first Ambassador bait caster, and then not long after that, I got a Shimano Bantam. Right when those came out, you remember those?
Yes.
I still have one.
Really?
Actually, I still have two. Yeah, I've got one of the original silver ones, and I've got one of the very, very late, very small, sort of slate colored ones. And you know what? They're great. They're great. Yeah. They're still really cool little reels. And out here, times when you're throwing a bait caster, you're usually using quite a bit lighter line, so it's not bad to have a little bit geared down tackle.
Yeah. And I don't know that we mentioned this, but you're out in Telluride right now, right? Is that right?
Well, right now, yeah. I'm a Colorado kid these days. I moved out here to become a fishing guide after going to school and getting a degree in journalism, radio, TV, film production from the University of Georgia in Athens, where I also fished a ton. I fished the Oconee, the white bass run coming out of Lake Oconee into the Oconee. Has to be experienced to be believed. And then the thing that people don't realize about, having now fished for them everywhere else, is that the lower southeast really has the corner on the market of really big white bass.
Yeah.
They call them sand bass in Texas, and they're fabulous. They call it, Arkansas too. But Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, if you want the biggest white bass in the country, that's it.
And if you find one, you find a bunch.
Oh, and they're so cooperative. If someone puts you into the middle of a bunch of white bass and you can't catch them, you need to hang it up.
Yes.
Because I love them.
There is a white bass run that's about 10 miles from my house every spring, and a little bit later, but the heavy part is in the spring. And I've taught many of people how to cast streamers and strip streamers, because you get so much repetition when you find one. You find one, you get him in, you get him off, you throw it right back in, you almost get another one right away. But there's still a little bit of technique that happens there. It's not a gimme every time you go and every cast you make, but you're going to get enough repetition to where somebody's going to really understand what they need to do. And I think that's important to making somebody a good streamer angler, and that carries forward. You can carry a streamer anywhere you want to. You can carry it to the ocean. What doesn't matter.
Streamers are the path to fishing the world. Yeah. Once you stop trout fishing, you realize that just about every other fish you'll ever fish for is caught with some sort of streamer or fly that you're going to be animating, and you have to be a good puppeteer. It's your manipulation of the fly that sells them on biting it. So you got to get good at drifting, but ultimately you really got to get good at making a fly fish in a compelling manner. So having a lot of, one of the things that going from white bass to trout to saltwater really has taught me is a tremendous repertoire of stripping techniques, long, slow guides, very short, sharp snaps, and everything in between. And really sort of going through that repertoire when I'm just hopping onto a new spot or hopping in the front of a boat nearby, and just trying to figure out, hey, what are they into today? Moving, through a real range of techniques and angles. That's regardless of where I fish. Having a really wide repertoire of stripping techniques has been a huge fish catching success story for me.
Until you find out exactly what it is they're looking for that particular day. I've been saying walk, 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 jog, 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 run, run, run is kind of a, I'm sure you've probably heard that before, but it kind of keeps people in a rhythm of, okay, I need to do this. I need to speed it up a little bit. I need to speed it up a little more. And then we move on to maybe a little bit longer, slower strip, maybe just a little short, quick wrist strip. We start going through that. The pattern of stripping until you get into the pattern of eating is critical, because you're not just bouncing around.
Yep.
So, and streamers will make you focus on that pattern and make you forget about everything else. If it's a good day, you really forget about everything else that you've been thinking about. You're in the zone. So as you're down around Atlanta, how'd you get your start in the business?
Because my brother and I had gotten into fishing so hard. I've got a younger brother, and we were so into fishing so young. My father, who did not fish but enabled, he was a professor at Emory. Dad didn't fish, but he knew to take my brother and I to some place to fish for a long time, and he became, as a non-fisherman, he became one of the best customers at the local fishing shop, which is still called the Fish Hawk in Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
So, we were really good customers there for about 4 or 5 years, leading up to the time that I was, at that point, I was now 12, about to go on to be 13. And my dad said to the then youngish owner of the Fish Hawk, Gary Merriman, he was like, "Man, do you guys ever need anybody to sweep the floors or look after this place? Do you guys ever want to hire a shop kid?" And they were like, uh, you know, we might hire Frank. I had the terrific fortune to work at the Fish Hawk starting when I was, like 12 and a half, almost 13, till I went off to college. And then, and after that, I would come back. But one of the great things first of all, about fishing in the Southeast and Atlanta is it's so diverse. And nowhere was it more diverse than inside the Fish Hawk. The Fish Hawk was every bit a bass shop, every bit a saltwater shop. We had 130 wides for marlin, we had bait casters for stripers, and we had fly rods for every trout and everything, all the way on up to tarpon and billfish and everything in between. And Gary, who ran it, and everybody that came in, I would hear, just in one day, I would hear stories, fresh back from the Keys or Argentina or Michigan or New Zealand. And, it was an incredibly horizon expanding experience for me, at this young age, starting at 12 and 13. First of all, to be hanging out with all these grown up men who are telling me all sorts of interesting things about my life ahead. And and also to be learning, about all of these incredible possibilities, far beyond the trout in my beloved home Chattahoochee, and in the farm ponds and rivers all around Georgia and the Southeast where I fished. Fishhawk played an immense part of getting me to this place where fishing really became my entire life.
So there's eventually going to be a kid out there that's going to listen to this. If you were trying to get a job in a shop as a kid, what would be the number one piece of advice you would give that kid, since you've lived it?
First of all, you got to be patient, because those jobs are hard to come by. But if you really care enough, and you are a good enough listener, and you are a good enough student of not just your little corner of the sport, but the whole thing, you become really valuable to a fly shop. And the only thing more valuable to a fly shop than a really good shop kid is that shop staffer that is also at times out on the water guiding.
Right.
Now that's the person that can really, quote chapter and verse, and make sure that if people are in the store to buy something, that they really get what they need. And, the thing that really continues to set fly fishing apart is that you do need a mentor. You do need a connection. And for those people that go out and shop at a big box store to get their gear, you're really missing out. If you really want to get good at fishing your local area, man, go to a fly shop. The prices are the same, and the mentorship and the tutelage that you can get are going to save you not just years, but maybe a decade.
That person that you're talking about, that mentor, will save you money in the long run.
Tons.
It's hard to say that, but they do. You don't buy 2 or 3 times; you buy once or twice, maybe. That's it.
Well, and to think about it, now that I'm a middle-aged man, the idea of being able to save either myself or somebody else a decade or 2 decades of doing it wrong, there is nothing in your life more valuable than time. Nothing.
That is a fact.
Parenting teaches me that as well.
Oh, that right there is a lifelong lesson.
Well, and that's one of the reasons, David, that I so love fishing, is I really feel like that there's a lot of great parallels between what fishing teaches us and how we should live our lives, in terms of being patient and being observant and being alert and really being appreciative of, all these great places that, we can let ourselves go if we make the effort.
I'm going to go back to the fly rod. Will take you a lot of places. It's gotten me to Colorado, to California, to Florida, to back to Michigan, all throughout the Southeast. And very seldom do I go anywhere without one, and most of the time I'm going because of one. So
exactly. That's, yeah. So
you were at the Fish Hawk. It sounds like Gary kind of maybe made sure that you were headed in the right direction, maybe took you under his wing just a little bit.
Gary was like the mean older brother that I never had. And at the time, he was running the place with Ronnie Hall, who was like on any given day, it was like the good cop, bad cop. Ronnie continues to be an incredible personality in the Georgia fishing scene, who does still put in the occasional shift at the Fish Hawk. But Gary and Ronnie were running the Fish Hawk, which was over on Buckhead Avenue in Buckhead now. They've got a new address now and a bigger shop on, I want to say, Miami Circle. But it's a fly shop that continues to be the largest fly shop east of the Mississippi.
Huh.
Always was. Yeah, it's bigger than the fly shop in terms of sales volume and stuff like that than the shops in Boston or New York City or any of the larger places anywhere on the eastern seaboard. Miami. Atlanta is an enormous fishing town, and the Fish Hawk has always been a clearinghouse for setting people up and facilitating all kinds of far-flung and local at-home fishing. So anyhow, Georgia was an amazing place to be, and the Southeast overall is one of the best places to become a really diverse fly fisherman. That was my experience.
I kind of look at Atlanta as a hub and with spokes off a wheel to go many, many different places within a 3 or 4 hour drive.
You bet.
And get to some really quality water. And there's good water down around Atlanta too. And I've interviewed a couple of folks that fish down in that area, and they primarily are trout guides in the North Georgia mountains. But the Chattahoochee is right there. I mean, it's like you drive over it. If you're going anywhere north, it seems like you drive over it, and probably east as well. But did you spend any time on the Hoochie?
Chattahoochee was probably the single most formative drainage in my entire life. I was raised 5 minutes from the banks of the Chattahoochee. I went out to the Chattahoochee to fish it for anything that would bite, from back in the day when just north of Atlanta was a relative wilderness. To believe it or not, I was fortunate enough to be able to jump in and be able to guide a little bit with River Through Atlanta Guide Service.
Yeah.
So I literally spent this entire life all over the place and in Colorado guiding the West. And then they say you can't go home again, David, but in a lot of really amazing ways, I was able to go home again and guide on the Chattahoochee for, the trout that I loved in all these places that I hadn't seen or thought about since quite literally my childhood. And, a lot had changed. And I'll tell you what, even as a really experienced trout guide in the West, can I just tell you how hard eastern trout and notably Chattahoochee trout can be?
Yeah.
I mean, I went in there. I was like, Chris Scally is the guy who runs River Through Atlanta. I was like, Chris, I grew up on this river, and I've been guiding a lot. I'll figure it out pretty quick. Wrong. Really being able to, really be able to interpret and time your floats relative to the flow regime that you may or may not get, in these southern tailwaters is a never-ending riddle and a wonderful equation to continuously work out in your mind. And I got it wrong a lot, but I got it right here and there too. And so I've got this wonderful reacquaintance with the Chattahoochee that just finished happening here in the last year and a half since I've been back. That was an incredible gift, and it was a big part of my return to guiding, having worked just about every other job at varying points in the fly fishing industry. So I went into the Fish Hawk when I was 12 to work, and then by the time I got done with, I worked at the Fish Hawk till I was 18, went off to UGA to study in Athens, got done with that, and then as soon as I was done with that, I began guiding. So, and after that, I was a rep, and I worked as a consultant, and I still do a little bit of that for manufacturers as well. I've been in the fly fishing industry literally ever since. So the Chattahoochee put me on and the Fish Hawk combined with the Chattahoochee put me on kind of a wonderful path that I'm really thankful for.
We interviewed Chris.
Oh yeah, did you?
Yeah, I went down and visited him, and he lives right there on the river, basically, right across the street from it. So I pulled into this little park. I mean, it had probably rained for 2 weeks solid. Every day, at least, it rained a little bit, and most days it rained a lot. And the hooch was just absolutely rolling in brown chocolate,
more like red, blood red.
Yeah,
blood red right there.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, man, this would be terrible, because we went through an extended rain period here too, and they were going through it down there as well. But as I talked to Chris, he was talking about how, well, if you get up next to the dam, a lot of times you can find some really clear water, and he actually pieced that river for me, piece by piece, kind of like a regular tailwater, like I would be used to, kind of like a spring creek, like you would be used to up in Pennsylvania in some places. And he really stepped it down and explained it section for section and did a really nice job. And his hospitality was fantastic. He fed me while I was there, which I couldn't thank you enough because I was a little bit hungry and just, you know how he is. He's just a guy that can just really, you connect with almost right off the bat.
Well, and I'll tell you what, when I was working with him and working for him, it was his generosity with sharing with me techniques that really, to tell you the truth, really helped, because returning to the Chattahoochee, it was an amazing riddle. So I really appreciated his generosity there, and still do.
Give us one of the techniques. You don't have to give us your number one, but what's something that somebody should keep in mind, probably, if I decided I want to go down there, other than hire Chris?
Yeah, I mean, there's essentially two, real deal tactics on the Chattahoochee that are going to pay the bills the most often. And it's no surprise to hear that, at least for fly fishing, what you really want to do is nymph really skillfully with a black, not too big and not too small, rubber legs. The Chattahoochee has a lot of Terra narcissus stoneflies in it, and they're jet black. They are not brown. The fish love black. They like a number of other flies next to that black stone. But sooner or later, fishing with either a really good black rubber legs or a small black woolly booger as your point fly, and then trying smaller stuff, or worms, or whatever else you're feeling at the moment. Just keeping that black centerpiece of your nymph rig is what really worked a lot for me. And I would say the other technique would be obviously throwing streamers. And in the Chattahoochee, I was really surprised to see, coming from a Western trout background, how often we use weighted flies and floating lines, and you just sort of let the fly sink on the leader. I was really impressed with the Chattahoochee being a place where you really needed a sink tip. And you really wanted to throw, those guys would throw, 8 weights and 9 weights with these big old chicken head flies. And I didn't much feel like that. And I didn't much feel like handing, an 8 weight to a client, because a lot of them would just not have a ton of fun with it. So I tended to fish with sink tips, but like on a 6 or a 7 weight and a more moderate sized fly.
Yep.
So that clients could learn how to do it and have a better chance, and typically catch a few of those fish that, a lot of times you're fishing for kind of a bigger fish when you're throwing that, and there's only so many of those around the Chattahoochee. Having said that, it was an amazing way to catch a not very big fish, like a 14 or 15 inch wild brown. Those are the two things. And the interesting thing about the Chattahoochee that I've not seen from the standpoint of trout fishing, one of the things that I really appreciated about the Chattahoochee was that some unusual colors in your flies really worked. And, that fire tiger combination of chartreuse and that sort of halfway fluorescent orange, and usually with a little bit of black striping or highlights in there. The fish, I have no idea why they liked it, but they did. Yeah. So Chattahoochee wise, you got to have nymph with some black stones, and don't be afraid to fish some big rigs with sink tips, and, sometimes some pretty out there fire tiger colored streamers.
The fire tiger doesn't catch you a lot of fish. I'm like you. I'm not sure
All
what
kinds.
The combination is, but it can anywhere from peacock bass to white bass, even, believe it or not. Muskie like it. Trout obviously like it. So it's one of those. I want to say
Tarpon
it's a color,
too.
but I think it's a combination. Yeah, tarpon too. Yeah, exactly.
Tarpon and snook are freaks for it.
Yeah.
Lose their minds. So yeah, it was just weird to you think of all these sort of rambunctious giant scale game fish that like fire tiger, and that was the first time I'd run into a place where fire tiger was really a trout thing. So yeah, there you go. That and the number one technique for the Chattahoochee is to call the dam to get the release schedule and be where there is either low or dropping water.
Yeah.
Fish don't much like the rise. They do like the drop, at least on the hooch.
Yep.
Which is unusual, because I know some other places where, for example, on the white, rising water could be amazing.
Yeah.
On the Chattahoochee, for me, it was rarely very productive.
And here in Middle Tennessee, you can get the caney in particular when it's on, and fishing well. You can fish the rise and catch some fish, but it's like a very short window, and it's hard to stay in that window as the water's coming up. If you can push down quick enough and fish slow enough, it's a great experience. But there is an art to that, and it's very tough. So our next thing is falling water, and then that's when it's really, really good.
And do you find that to stay on that curve of the rising water, that you have to have a power boat to keep yourself in it?
It helps to have one. I've got a drift boat, so it just takes a lot of work, and eventually you just fall out of it.
Right. That was my experience, because I was rowing the hooch also, and I didn't have an outboard, and I would make fun of the other guides that had kickers on the back of their dories. I was like, oh, you motor people don't understand, how hard I'm having to row here.
Yeah.
But anyhow, and Chris, notably Chris is a master at staying in that curve, because he's got a jet boat that and fishing with him, he's like, oh, this has been great, and you're still really catching me. He's like, but we got to go. It's like, no, I think we should stay. He's like, oh no, we've got to go. If you want to stay in it, if you want to stay in it, reel in, let's go. And so, to be good at a southern tailwater, you have to routinely break the cardinal rule of guiding, which is don't leave fish to find fish. Yes. And dealing with the TVA and that flow regime that we have in the South means you got to do that over and over and over again. Which it's a big confidence move.
Oh, absolutely it is.
Yeah, yes. It is.
Yes.
And oh God, will it leave you hanging?
Yeah.
I've been behind the flow on the Chattahoochee more than once.
Yeah, I've been hung out before too. Of even on falling water, you can get on falling water and spend too much time somewhere and get out of the right fall, and then you're just stuck
not be able
in
to
low
recatch
water.
it.
Yeah, and
Yep.
you really can't catch up on that one because everything's kind of dead. So there's
Yeah.
basically two sides to that coin.
And it's hard not to want to stand and linger in that dropping water. That's just getting more and more interesting looking, with each passing moment. But it's so inviting, especially in a clear southern tailwater where you're just like, oh, this is looking more and more like a spring creek with any moment. You don't even notice that you haven't caught anything for half hour and a half. It's like, oh, well, this is beautiful, but
Yeah.
it suddenly sucks, and now I can't catch that. I can't catch that southern tide.
And I think one of the problems with that low water scenario is that you start seeing the bottom and you
Yeah,
start seeing fish.
right.
Don't always realize that they've stopped eating whatever it is that you're trying to get them to eat because
Yeah.
they're just now they're in hunker down mode, which I feel like if I had to put a thought in their head, which I often do and know I shouldn't, but my thought would be that they're thinking, wonder what's going to happen, how low is this going to get, and where's my safety exit,
Right.
and how do I get there, and where's it going to take me? And then the next thing you know, they're not thinking about food or your fly, but I can see them, they're right there, and that makes it tough.
Yeah, it adds to their moodiness. And I'll tell you what, southern trout, I have found fish in the southeast are quite a bit harder to catch trout wise than they are in the American West. If you are a good southeastern trout fisherman and can really catch wild fish in the southeast, you will find that fishing in the West is not a cakewalk, but it's pretty straightforward. There's no rhododendron out here.
Right.
There's no mountain laurel out here. Vegetation out here will oftentimes give you your fly back. How's that for a difference? And we've got, out here, we've actually got room to backcast. It's pretty novel. But the main thing that I really notice with the fish out here is how much less shy trout are in the West. And I fished for some very shy fish out here. They are not as shy as a pressured southeastern fish that is in, like, for example, one of the streams in, Smoky Mountain National Park or in North Georgia or something like that. Catching a 16-inch brown out of a small stream in the Appalachians is harder than catching a 25-inch brown in the American West. That is a hard fish to get near.
Yes. Yeah,
and catch with a fly.
There's some guys up in the Smokies that are really good at it, and North Georgia.
Yep.
Jimmy Harris comes to mind, his group out of Unicoi.
I did a fishing show when I was doing the TU show on the Rise. I went fishing with Jimmy, and everywhere we went, Jimmy caught more fish than I did, like right now. It's just like, oh, come on, Jimmy, help a brother out. Show me what I got to do here. I've forgotten what it takes to catch these Appalachian fish. And when you fish with Jimmy, one of the things that Jimmy does, it's not all fish, but it's certainly the first fish or two of the day. You're fishing with a Southerner when he hooks up, he goes, yee-haw! So, and we're all mic'd up and like that. And it's just like, oh my God, Jimmy, now everybody knows you're catching them. And I've got, I don't really yee-haw it so much when I catch them. But anyhow, I heard Jimmy yee-hawing a lot when we were fishing together. And we were fishing delayed harvest on the Georgia portion of the Nantahala, in addition to some other areas in northern Georgia. And it was pretty cool. But yeah, Jimmy was way more proficient at catching his home fish than I was.
And Jimmy knows everybody. He can't go anywhere without knowing somebody.
It's true. It's true.
So if I think about Atlanta as that spoke that I was talking about earlier, let's move on to, because there's some salt water down there too. And I know you've done some saltwater stuff.
Half of my life.
Yeah. How did you get into it? What really drug you into saltwater the way that you got into it?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, I told you that my parents were from the North and from the South. My mom was from Boston, and her family had a place on an island in Maine. So I would go up, and some of the very first fishing memories of my entire life were trolling for mackerel simply to feed the family out of a rowboat when I was a kid. And I just loved it from the word go. We literally trolled daredevil spoons.
Red and white.
Behind a rowboat where my dad rowed. And we would just haul these mackerel in hand over fist. And they're beautiful little fish. They're about the size of a trout. They've got this amazing green and black tiger stripe. You know, they look like kind of a brookie striping pattern on their top. They're
Yeah.
gorgeous. And anyhow, and I caught flounder. And so to me, it was never about fresh and salt as much it was just all great fishing. And I never really drew a line between the two until, you know, kind of farther down the road when I, you know, started to really think about what some of the differences I was finding between fresh and salt as I became a more analytical fisherman.
There are some things that you can take back and forth. You know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, freshwater fish, in a lot of ways, they are harder to catch but easier to find. Saltwater fish are easier to catch but harder to find. It's a great sort of principle that I find that continues to be true with some notable exceptions like, you know, permit and roosters and stuff like that, where they're both hard to find and hard to catch. Yeah, so and that's why, you know, that's why when people talk about the very hardest fish to catch in the planet, a lot of times it ends up being a saltwater fish.
As you're thinking about saltwater out there, is there anything in particular, anybody in particular that really started you down that road of saltwater from fresh to saltwater?
Well, you know, I was really fortunate in that I grew up next to this amazing man named Ron Curry. Ron Curry was one of the great pioneers of saltwater fly fishing in the Florida Keys, you know, really starting, I think he began fly fishing in the Keys in 1951 or 52. And, you know, by the time I got to know him as a little kid that lived next door, he had this amazing trophy room downstairs in his house that had tarpon and sharks and eagle rays and sawfish and redfish and permit and bonefish and barracuda and snapper all on the wall. It was like this complete fishing paradise. And Ron ultimately became one of the greatest mentors that I ever had. And it was Ron many, many years ago when I was probably still not even 10 years old. Ron, you know, kind of commenting on me talking about how amazing the brim fishing was in the creek down the way. He was like, Frank, one day you're going to realize that fresh water's for drinking and salt water's for fishing. Yeah. And, you know, he was sort of, he was such an incredibly wise man. And I listened, you know, without fail to everything that he said. I don't fully agree with his sentiment there because I do so love freshwater, but he makes a really valid point. And I do find that if you're good at saltwater fishing, fish everywhere become a little bit easier. And, you know, and if you're good at trout fishing, it's a really terrific start to being a pretty good saltwater fisherman in places too. You know, if you've got a good understanding of how to find trout, you can find snook. You can find stripers in the Atlantic Northeast. You've just got an eye for it that you may not realize, but you do. So, you know, I see all of the ways in which one fish pertains to another. I was adding it up not too long ago. You know, my friend Jeff Currier has probably caught, I don't know how many hundreds of fish. I know Currier's probably caught like 400 or 500 now species. But wow. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
And so I sat down, inspired by him, I sat down and tallied it up, and I've caught about 320 different species of fish. And, you know, some of them are, you know, not terribly notable, like a lizard fish, or I nymphed up a sculpin, or this or that.
Yeah.
But I've caught some really wonderfully diverse and unusual and different fish from all over the planet. And I see more similarities between them than I see big differences.
You do kind of start connecting dots. The more you see, the more you take in, the more you learn, the more you can start connecting those dots of some fish have these habits and some fish that have these tendencies.
You know, so Ron Curry was this amazing influence in my life, and he began saltwater fly fishing in the Florida Keys as a young man in the 1950s. He actually ended up teaching his friend Billy Pate how to fly fish. And he, you know, he was just this amazing figure in my life who took the time to show me how to double haul an 8-weight in the backyard when I was 8. He had 3 beautiful daughters and a dragster. So I was always, there was 100 reasons to go to the neighbor's house.
Oh yeah,
at all times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey man, Ron was friends with Evel Knievel.
Really?
Dude, how cool is that?
Yeah, he had cool.
I never met Evel, but he had pictures of him and Evel doing all kinds of crazy shit all over the South. Because Evel lived in Atlanta for a while.
I didn't know that.
I think he did. Yeah, yeah. So anyhow, he was just this amazing figure. And though we didn't fish together very often, we fished a little bit together. He had a place up at Lake Lanier, and we went and fished together there some. But it was casting in the yard and him telling me stories about fishing in the Florida Keys where he would say, hey, I used to be able to go to Lignum Vitae and lay down in the road and take a nap because he knew that there wouldn't be a car driving down the overseas highway for another 20 or 30 minutes. And he said, for the first long time, he hardly ever had a boat because he could just wade out and catch 10-pound bonefish anywhere he wanted to go, all along the road system there. And he was not really friends with Ted Williams. I don't think Ted Williams was friends with a whole lot of people because Ted was a tough personality. But Ron was friends with all the original guides, down there from Jimmy Albright to George Hommel to, the who's who of the people that really started saltwater fly fishing as we knew it. Flip Pallett, Stu Apt, all these guys knew Ron by first name, and they all fished in tarpon tournaments and bonefish tournaments throughout the 60s and 70s. Anyhow, so it was the amazing wellspring of cutting edge fly fishing knowledge that Ron let me in on. And then, as I went to the Fish Hawk, it continued to just sort of blow wide open. So Atlanta and growing up there with these incredible, mentors really instantly exposed me to a much broader slice of the world possibilities with regards to fly fishing.
What are the chances of living right down the street of somebody like that?
It was amazing.
I lived right across the street from the guy that really took me under his wing. An excellent neighbor. And I just came home with a fly rod in the back of the truck, and I had just got done fishing and catching 2 fish. So I thought, I got this thing dialed in, And he comes out and he goes, "You been fly fishing?" And I wanted to say, well, whatever gave you that idea? There's a fly rod hanging out the back of my truck. But I said, yeah. He said, well, whenever it cools down a little bit, I'll take you fly fishing. And I said, yeah. I thought to myself, I'll show you a thing or two. That did not happen. But he was right across the street from me. Like literally, he could back out of his driveway up into mine. What are the chances of you having somebody right down the street that had those connections and that understanding of that type of fishing and knowing people like he sounds like he knew? That's just crazy.
It is. And, for a long time, I used to tell people, as I kind of got more and more into the fly fishing business, and I would bump into Stu Apt, or I'd bump into Flip Pallett, and these were people that I didn't really know. Rick Ruoff, this whole legendarily Keys bunch of expert anglers. And I would introduce myself and I would say, hey, I bring news from my friend and my mentor, Ron Curry. And they would immediately be like, whoa, where did Ron go? And I would tell them, what Ron was up to and what Ron was doing. And Ron had become sick and it kind of confined to a wheelchair right after, kind of taking the world of saltwater fly fishing by storm. And it was during, sort of this time where I'd moved to the West to pursue my fly fishing that Ron, because he could no longer fish, gave me these reels that I had fondled and looked after and, just stared at my entire life, these saltwater fly reels. And he gave them to me, and I have them to this day. And I fish with them still. Because that was the promise. He was like, Frank, I'm in this wheelchair. I can't go fish anymore. He was like, I watch my friends on TV now catching all these fish, and I wish I could do it, but I need you to take these reels and go out there and do it and send me pictures and keep me posted on how it's going. And he gave me a Seamaster tarpon and a Seamaster salmon. So essentially those are, one's obviously a tarpon reel, and the other is essentially a bonefish reel. And I've caught the living crap out of both of those fish and a whole lot of others on both of those reels. And invariably, when I hop into a boat in the Keys, my guide friends are like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you doing? That reel needs to go back on shore into a glass case. And I explained to him sort of what it's all about. And, that I need to keep his memory alive by taking this out and really using it. So
the glass case wasn't the deal, was it?
No. And I've got a glass case in my house that I put them in.
Yeah.
And they live there, but they don't stay there all the time. And and the cool thing is I caught not my biggest tarpon, but I caught my biggest bonefish on the Seamaster salmon that Ron gave me.
That's awesome.
I caught a 12-pounder off of Key Largo, kind of back in the day. And back when there was a lot more bigger bonefish around the Keys than there are at the moment. But
yeah,
they're coming back pretty quick.
I think they come and go.
Yeah,
fish tend to travel. They're one place for a while and another place for a while, and I think they rotate in and out of size and everything else. There's way more to it than we'll ever know.
Well, now that they're tagging bonefish, they're finding out that Cuban bonefish are Florida bonefish, are Bahamian bonefish. You have to remember that bonefishing started because people needed to go catch them for bait. You have to remember that back in the day of the Bahamian, the Long Key Fishing Club, and the Bahamian tuna and marlin clubs that were at Bimini, going out to get a bonefish was the number one. A bonefish is the number one bait for a blue marlin or bluefin tuna. And the reason that the bonefish is recognized by those fish is because periodically schools of bonefish will leave the flats and go from Florida across the Straits of Florida to the Bahamas or to Cuba. So they get seen by all these pelagic fish that are like, man, those bonefish are delicious.
Yeah, it must really taste good.
Yeah. So literally bonefishing sprung out of a need to go catch bait. And, Hemingway and Zane Grey all wrote about when they were pursuing tuna off Bimini, how they would send the boys out to go catch bait, catch bonefish, and they were always coming back late because they were having such a good time going out catching bait. No kidding. It's this ongoing theme. And finally, the grown-ups go out to catch bait because they can't, they can no longer rely on the kids to catch bait and get back on time. And they're like, damn, this is really fun. And that is part of what gave us bonefishing, a uniquely Bahamian and Floridian pursuit at first. And it was all because billfish and bluefin loved to eat bonefish, and they still do. It's a great bait.
That's awesome.
Well, think about how symmetrical a bonefish is and how perfectly you can rig it to troll. Bonefish is it's the world's most symmetrical fish. It's just as tall as it is wide. So it never trolls funny.
Right.
So I'm telling you, and it's chrome, the most reflective fish you could ever tie on.
Yeah.
So
I've never thought of that, but that makes total sense.
Bonefish started out as people gathering bait.
Well, hey, I want to move on to one more topic that we've got here, and you're in Telluride.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where you're going to be for a while? You think?
Well, I'm going to be in Colorado, David. I spend my greatest amount of time in Telluride guiding, and my wife and daughter are in Boulder, so I go back and forth a fair amount. My wife is a professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'm going to hop in the car and go back up to Boulder, check in with them.
Well, we've got flights leaving Charlotte, Atlanta, Louisville, Little Rock, Nashville every day, headed out to Denver. Some headed into, I guess, to Telluride with a
little bit here and there. Telluride is wonderfully hard to get to,
which makes it intriguing.
Doesn't matter who you are; they're going to lose your luggage too.
So carry on your rods.
Yeah.
Flying into Denver, flying into Telluride, flying in somewhere close. If I decided I wanted to come out there next summer, what would you have me do to really have a good experience out there? Because this is another place that's on my bucket list, and I'm sure there's a listener out there and it's on their bucket list.
Well, southern Colorado, whether you're talking about Telluride or Durango, we've got a lot of rivers that start at very high elevations and really roll right down out into the desert. That's one of the things that we've really got is access to a greater variety of elevations than almost any other part of the Rockies. We can go 20 minutes and lose 5,000 feet.
Right.
Like fast.
Yeah.
Maybe not 5,000, but certainly 3 or 4. And that's part of the fun here is that we have trout that live, at 12,000 feet. And if you know where you're going, we've got trout that live at 5,000 or 6,000 feet. And it allows for a great deal of versatility. As far as the rivers around here, I'm a big fan of the Gunnison River. The Gunnison is the second largest river in Colorado. The Gunnison comes together with the Colorado at Grand Junction, and that's why it's called Grand Junction.
Okay.
And, the Gunnison winds out through the desert all the way through there, and where it comes out of the highlands from Gunnison, Colorado, and Crested Butte, Colorado, all the way down to Grand Junction, there is something interesting going on in that river just about any time of the year. It's a great place to catch some big fish. It's a great place to catch numbers of fish. And, there's just an amazing amount of diversity.
Doesn't the upper part of that river have a salmon run of some kind?
Yeah.
Just below the Taylor?
Yep. The world record kokanee, as far as I know, pretty much all come from the Gunnison upstream of Blue Mesa Reservoir. So, my friends over there have caught some real deal 27, 28-inch kokanee. Huge one. These are 9 or 10 pound fish maybe.
And there's some big browns in there too, aren't there?
The browns get much bigger. I think the state record brown is a 30-pounder.
Yeah.
That came in one of the tributaries of the Gunnison, which is called the East River. But it's widely thought that fish swam up into the headwaters from the lake below. So the Gunnison's got 3 or 4 reservoirs on it and a number of different runs going in and out of those reservoirs. And down here, it's our big river. It's where we float the most. We've got, probably 20 other small and medium-sized rivers all around here that are lovely as well. And, we don't have as many fish as, say, Aspen or Steamboat or Vail, but we have a lot fewer fishermen.
Because it's not easy to get to.
Yeah, and, and our fishing requires a little bit higher degree of athleticism, down in this neck of the woods because of that great range of elevations. We've got some real high gradient. We've got some rivers that really pour out of the mountains, and you kind of got to be a badass to scramble up them. And if you can scramble up a half mile, you're going to catch a bunch of fish. If you can scramble up a whole mile, you're going to catch twice that many.
Yeah.
So, there's some athleticism that goes with some of our fisheries. And the more athletic you are, the less footprints you see.
And you also, if you're coming in from one of these places, Charlotte, Atlanta, Louisville, Nashville, anywhere like that, or even Little Rock, it's pretty dang flat here, and it takes a while to get acclimated for most humans.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It takes me, when I come back south, it takes me 2 or 3 days when I return to Colorado to really get my wind. I live at 9,000 feet here in Telluride, and it is, it's really high elevation. And no matter who you are, when you go out west, give yourself some time at the beginning to acclimate. Don't go out and party too hard.
Yep.
And get yourself all dehydrated. I've seen a bunch of people really ruin their entire vacation on the first night.
Yeah. Yep.
Just by overdoing it. And, once you get dehydrated out here, it's hard to come back from. It can be really debilitating. Yeah. And it's something you do not have to think about in the South. I'll have a water bottle by my side in the South. And even in August, I'll only take 2 or 3 sips out of it. Whereas in the West, I'll go through an entire Camelback.
The first time I came out there, we stopped at the grocery store. I had a friend that lived out there for a while, and he said, "Come on out here and fish with me." And we fished the Taylor and the Gunnison.
Oh, wow.
That's where we went to. We stayed in Almont, and when we left the airport, I had my Camelback, and I said, stop in this grocery store, and I bought 24 waters, and I was there for 4 days. Actually, probably 3 days is more like it. Went through all 24 of those, filled that Camelback up numerous times at the cabin we were staying at, and he just kept saying, I've never seen anybody drink so much water, but it was because I was paranoid that I was going to get sick, that I was going to get dehydrated, and I couldn't get it back in a short enough time for me to be able to make the most out of that particular trip. So that was my goal. And,
good job.
And I did pretty good, and I've been out since then and not done quite as well, but it's never been because I ran out there and drank the first night. That's a no-no.
And that's a huge difference between fishing in Colorado and fishing in Montana, for example, even Wyoming. Yeah. Most of the fishing happens in Colorado above 6,000 feet. Most of the fishing in Montana and Wyoming happens below 6,000 feet.
Let me ask you one more question here, since we're talking about Telluride. What about places to eat? Are there really good places to eat out there? Because that's way up on my list.
Telluride as a Western destination is a really pretty amazing one. It's got a lot of amazing outsized culture for its size of town. It's only maybe 3,000 people that live here year round. But we've got, all these film festivals and music festivals and all this kind of cool stuff that goes on throughout the summer. We've got, because of the proximity of the desert to here, we've got some amazing farmers markets. We get some terrific produce from down low. And we've got some of the finest restaurants of any ski area in Colorado here in Telluride. And there's some stuff that's reasonably priced, and there's some stuff that's outrageously priced, and there's some good stuff in between as well. So, however you want to play it, there's some terrific cuisine here in Telluride, and a lot of great ingredients for if you want to rent a condo or rent a house and cook it yourself. So that's usually how I end up preferring to do it.
I usually do the same. I'll go out 2 or 3 times, and that's why food is high on my list. But I like to also eat in, and even if it's just a bologna sandwich for lunch, and save up those really, really good restaurants. Eating local fresh food like that can't be beat either. Totally get that.
Well, you want to hear something traitorous to know about the West is that the Gunnison in a town called Palisade is responsible for, and I come from the peach state, so I feel like I know peaches, but I'm sorry, my fellow Georgians. The best peaches in America come from Colorado.
Really?
Yes, sir. Best sweet corn also.
Oh.
Yep. Sorry.
Okay.
And I'm telling you, man, Colorado peaches are among the best, got to be on the planet.
Dude, somebody just hit stop on this podcast right there. Somebody from Georgia just hit stop. And they're like, I can't listen to this anymore.
He's right. He's not wrong. And he's not wrong. I didn't want it to be true either. I grew up my whole life knowing that Georgia had the best peaches anywhere. And, it gave me the best means to be able to appreciate the one place where there might be a little bit better. I came for the fish, but stayed for the peaches.
Well, we're going to stop on that note, Frank. Man, I sure appreciate you. We put this together really quick, and it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah,
I know it is.
Yeah, well, I had a great time talking to you, David.
I learned quite a bit about the Southeast, around the Georgia, Atlanta area, things I didn't know, and topping it off with things I didn't know about Telluride and in that area, even though I've been out to the Gunnison and that sort of thing. So, man, I really appreciate you letting us come into your home, and I hope you make your trip across the state tomorrow a very safe one. And when you're back in the South, if you come back through Nashville, and I assume you probably will sooner or later, you need to look me up and let's go fish. Honestly, I will make time to go.
Thank you. I would love that, man. And hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. How long does muskie season last? To you? Will you go for them as late as April, or is that?
Yeah, so I'll take off December, and I've had some trips up in early December, but then you start getting around mid-December and Christmas is there. January and February, if you've got good days that are warm, you can have some good warm days in those two months. March, April is when it's really can be really, really good. You get into May, it starts getting warm, the water starts getting kind of low, and frankly, I start back trout guiding,
right.
So. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
kind of do what you got to.
I'd
So.
hate to be a full-time muskie guide. It'd be too much of a roller coaster.
Yeah, like I was saying the other earlier, Sunday I was out and it was just a terrible day, just terrible.
Yeah.
We didn't see a fish in a stretch of water that we should have seen 10.
Yeah.
And just I don't know where the hell they were. I just don't know. And I told the guys, hey, I don't know where they are. And man, they were throwing some good flies in some great places with some great retrieves. And you would think one of them would run out there and at least grab it,
or just follow.
Yeah, or just even. I mean, we didn't even get that. Then you start questioning yourself, and at the end of the day, you're just like, "Woo, I'm wore out."
Yeah,
so,
well, muskies did get a lot more popular here the last little bit.
Yeah. Well, man, I sure appreciate it. Very good job, as usual.
Nice to visit with you, David. I appreciate the interest. Thanks for including me.
All right. Thanks, Frank.
Okay.
See you.
Bye-bye.